In English football, some clubs are defined by giant stadiums, decades of trophies, and global fan bases. AFC Bournemouth's story is different. For most of their history, they were not seen as a powerhouse at all. They were a modest South Coast club, playing in front of smaller crowds, fighting through the lower divisions, and often living closer to financial danger than football glamour. Yet that is exactly what makes their rise so compelling. Bournemouth, known as the Cherries, built one of the most unlikely modern journeys in the English game, from regional football and fourth-tier survival battles to Premier League status and, according to the club's recent history, a historic qualification for European competition. This is not just a story of promotion. It is a story of identity, crisis, reinvention, and the belief that a club does not need to be enormous to change its destiny. AFC Bournemouth are based in Kings Park, Boscombe, a suburb of Bournemouth in Dorset, on England's south coast. Their home, Dean Court, has been central to the club's identity since 1910. Unlike the huge football cathedrals associated with England's traditional elite, Dean Court has long reflected Bournemouth's smaller scale, compact, local, and tightly connected to the community around it. The club itself was formed in 1899 under the name Boscombe. At that time, English football was still spreading beyond its industrial strongholds, and many clubs grew out of local communities rather than national ambition. Bournemouth's early roots were humble, shaped by regional competition and local support. The club would later change names more than once, but that small-town foundation remained important. Before the Premier League lights, before the television money, Bournemouth were simply a local football institution trying to find their place. The nickname, the Cherries, is one of the most recognizable parts of Bournemouth's identity. Like many English football nicknames, its exact cultural weight comes from tradition as much as branding. The red and black colors, the local familiarity of Dean Court, and the nickname all helped give the club a character that supporters could rally around. In 1971, the club officially adopted the name AFC Bournemouth, the name used today. But long before that, they had been known as Bournemouth and Boscombe Athletic, reflecting their local geography and gradual evolution. These name changes were not just cosmetic. They mirrored a club slowly moving from neighborhood roots toward broader recognition. Bournemouth were never born into national prominence. They had to construct an identity step by step, and the Cherries became the symbol of that persistence. Bournemouth's first major steps came through the regional football structure. After competing locally, the club rose from the Hampshire League into the Southern League in 1920. That mattered because the Southern League was a stronger platform, offering more serious competition and a route toward professional recognition. In 1923, Bournemouth and Boscombe Athletic were elected into the Football League. For a club of their size, joining the Football League was a defining milestone. It placed them inside the official national pyramid, where results had wider consequences and where long-term survival became a serious test. But election into the league did not mean immediate glory. Instead, Bournemouth settled into the hard reality of lower division football, long seasons, difficult travel, financial limits, and the constant challenge of staying competitive without the resources of bigger clubs. For 35 years, Bournemouth remained in the 3rd Division South. That kind of long stay tells you a lot about the club's position in English football. They were stable enough to survive, but not powerful enough to break upward. In that era, lower league football was often defined by endurance. Clubs had to balance ambition with basic survival, and a single poor season could threaten everything. Bournemouth did enjoy a notable success in 1946, winning the 3rd Division South Cup. It was not a national championship, but for a club in their position, silverware mattered. It gave supporters a moment of pride and showed that Bournemouth could compete within their world. Still, the bigger breakthrough remained out of reach. The club's history through this period was less about dramatic headlines and more about persistence through decades of modest expectation. In 1958, English football reorganized the lower divisions, and Bournemouth were placed in the newly formed 3rd Division. Reorganization often sounds administrative, but for clubs it can change the level of competition and the pressure of survival. Bournemouth continued to battle within the lower tiers, but by 1970, they suffered relegation. That drop could have become a long decline, yet the club responded immediately. In the 1970-71 season, they won promotion straight back. Immediate promotion is important because it prevents relegation from becoming part of a losing culture. It shows resilience and protects momentum. Around this period, in 1971, the club became AFC Bournemouth, marking a new chapter in name and identity. But the football remained unpredictable. By 1975, Bournemouth were relegated again, returning to the 4th division and once more facing the hard climb upward. The early 1980s brought another turn. Bournemouth earned promotion in the 1981-82 season, lifting themselves out of the 4th division. Then, in 1984, they won the Associate Members' Cup, another significant achievement for a lower league club. These competitions can be overlooked by outsiders, but for clubs outside the top tier, they provide rare chances to play meaningful knockout football, build confidence, and give supporters days to remember. The real breakthrough arrived in 1986-87, when Bournemouth won the 3rd division title. A league title is different from a cup run because it proves consistency over an entire season. For Bournemouth, it meant reaching the 2nd tier of English football, a level they had rarely touched. They spent 3 seasons there, which was a major achievement, but sustaining that status proved difficult. The club had climbed, but the financial and sporting demands were rising too. By the late 1990s, the pressure caught up with Bournemouth. In 1997, the club entered administration. In football, administration is not just a financial term, it is a crisis that threatens jobs, identity, and sometimes the existence of the club itself. It usually means debts have become unmanageable and outside control is needed to stabilize the organization. For supporters, it can feel like watching history hang by a thread. Bournemouth survived, but the effects lingered. In 2002, they were relegated back to the 4th tier. Yet once again, they did not remain down for long. In 2003, Bournemouth won the playoffs and earned immediate promotion. That quick response reflected a pattern in the club's story. Even when pushed downward by instability, they found ways to bounce back. But the deeper financial problems had not disappeared. The second major financial collapse came in 2008, when Bournemouth entered administration again and were relegated back into League Two. This was one of the darkest points in the club's modern history. League Two is the 4th tier, and for a club in administration, the danger is not only relegation but possible long-term decline. At that moment, Bournemouth looked far removed from any Premier League dream. They were a small club with limited resources, recent financial trauma, and an uncertain future. But near the end of that year, they made a decision that would transform everything. They appointed Eddie Howe as manager. Howe had a deep connection with the club, having played for Bournemouth, and he understood its culture. His arrival did not instantly erase the problems, but it gave the club direction, belief, and a football identity built around improvement rather than fear. Under Eddie Howe, Bournemouth's rise became one of the most extraordinary promotion stories in English football. The first step came in 2009-10, when the club finished second in League Two and won promotion. That was already impressive given how fragile the club had recently been. Then, after building further, Bournemouth finished second in League One in 2012-13, earning promotion to the Championship. Each promotion raised the level of opponents, the speed of the game, and the expectations around the club. Many teams struggle after moving up once, let alone repeatedly. But Bournemouth kept adapting. Howe's teams became known for confidence, attacking football, and a refusal to behave like underdogs. The club was no longer merely surviving. It was climbing with purpose, and the football world began to notice that something unusual was happening on the South Coast. The greatest leap came in the 2014-15 season, when Bournemouth won the championship title. That achievement sent them into the top tier of English football for the first time in their history. To understand the scale of that moment, remember where they had been only a few years earlier: administration, League Two, and uncertainty. Now they were champions of the second tier and heading to the Premier League, the richest and most watched domestic league in the world. Promotion to the Premier League changes everything. It brings enormous exposure and financial reward, but also massive pressure. Bournemouth would face clubs with global fanbases, elite internationals, and far bigger stadiums. Yet the symbolic power of the promotion was already secure. A club once fighting for survival had reached the summit of the English pyramid. Bournemouth stayed in the Premier League for 5 seasons, which was a major achievement in itself. For newly promoted clubs, survival is often the first and hardest goal. The financial gap, the quality of opposition, and the week-to-week intensity can expose weaknesses quickly. Bournemouth's ability to remain there showed that their rise was not a one-season miracle. However, the Premier League is unforgiving, and in 2020 the club were relegated. Relegation can be devastating because it ends the top-flight dream and forces a club to adjust financially and emotionally. But Bournemouth again proved they could recover. In 2022, under the management of Scott Parker, they returned to the Premier League as championship runners-up. The comeback reinforced the idea that Bournemouth had become more than a fairy tale. They had developed a structure capable of reaching the top level again. After returning to the Premier League, Bournemouth's story continued to evolve. Under Andoni Iraola, the club reached a new historic high by finishing 6th in the 2025-26 season, according to the provided club record, earning qualification for the UEFA Europa League for the first time. For a club whose past includes decades in the 3rd Division South, repeated relegations, and 2 administrations, European football represents a remarkable transformation. It shows how far the Cherries have travelled, from Boscombe roots, to Dean Court survival, to the biggest stages in English football and beyond. AFC Bournemouth's history is not defined by uninterrupted success. It is defined by recovery. Every setback became part of the climb. And that is why their rise stands out, not because it was easy, but because it seemed so unlikely for so long. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.